Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to IHWE Radio. This is David Fuller standing by on Super Bowl Sunday. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to everybody. I know it's considered a national holiday. So here we are on Super Bowl Sunday, just a couple hours before the festivities begin at Metlife Stadium. Hope everybody enjoys their Super Bowl experience, whether you're there live at the stadium or you're at home. And please remember to be safe wherever you are in your travels home from, again, wherever you're watching the Super Bowl. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special edition of IHWE Radio to coincide with the Super Bowl. And we have a very special, something I've wanted to do for a while is I wanted to do something called the Guest Booker Show. We would bring somebody who has booked a successful territory or successful territories over the years. In our business, the wrestling business, several people call themselves a booker, but very few have had the success to maintain that title. Anybody can slap a name on themselves or a title these days, especially if you run your own company. What I have done is I have tried to take successful bookers that are known in the history books by several has-good bookers in different territories, and we've kind of picked out different angles or different eras, and we're going to put that on the drawing board today. As our guest, he's going into the Texas Wrestling Hall of Fame this coming March. We're honored to have him. He's an author. He has over 30 years in professional wrestling. He made a living off this, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't just buy a pair of boots from the mall and go every weekend and wrestle at his friend's show. He made a living off this. He was on television for several years. He made several people look better than some of them should have ever been. And he is also an author and a college professor and a father. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dusty Wolfe. Thank you, Dusty.
Yeah, David, thank you. I don't know if I could live up to all that, but let's see what we can do here.
All right. Well, and folks, bear with me. My son is in the background. That he's going to make sure he's heard.
Yeah.
Dusty has the same thing in his
so, yeah, not quite as little as yours anymore, but yeah, I'm a little bit older to be starting with the new one. But yeah, they don't have the same patience that the older ones have. It's me now, exactly.
Right on. Well, today's show is something different. What we're going to do is we're going to take a time in history and put it on the board. And Dusty has booked for several different promoters over the years. Dusty started with Joe Blanchard in Southwest Championship Wrestling. He's worked for Vince McMahon. He's worked for Jim Crockett. He's worked for Ted Turner. He's worked overseas. He's done some goodwill in Korea. He's booked for several people down here in Texas over the years. The most notable company in the last few years people would know he's booked for is XCW out of Denton. XCW had worldwide DVD distribution, pay-per-views, and television. Dusty was a very big hand in that company's success. Dusty is one of the most respected men in the professional wrestling business, and when I say that, I mean that because he's respected by the people that actually matter. So that's big. He's one of those. He's got we're going to have people on here like Black Bart, like James Beard, Dusty Wolfe in that class. And that's why he's going into the Texas Wrestling Hall of Fame in March. He's joining Terry Gordy. He's joining Gorgeous Gary Young. He's joining Stan the Lariat Hansen. It's going to be a great class. What does it mean to you to be honored into the Texas Wrestling Hall of Fame along with people like that?
It's huge. It's really huge because anytime you realize people remember what you did, especially a guy like me that never got a push, never was supposed to be remembered. I was supposed to just go in and do my job and leave. It's huge. And in one way, it's a testament to whatever I set out to do. And I guess I accomplished a little bit because I knew to be more important behind the scenes than in front of the camera was my path. Early on, I knew that. And somehow, I guess I succeeded at some level just simply because my name gets included with some names like you just mentioned.
Well, we're honored to have you, and I can say this, and it's a shoot. I really mean this. I used to watch you. I mean, Dusty wrestled, and most of you may know Dusty as Dale Wolfe. He wrestled on television. He was a journeyman. Some people call him enhanced, but I like to call him journeyman wrestler. He used to do a lot of Vince McMahon's television, WWF Superstars, WWF Wrestling Challenge, and Dusty was one of those guys that you got into, along with it. I remember you and I remember Pez Watley.
Yeah.
And you two guys were the guys I remember from television. I can always know it. Oh, that's Dale Wolfe. And you have your jacket on and your hair. Your hair's the stuff of legend.
No, it's not another. Well, the lack of hair has become a bigger legend now. But yeah, I was gifted there. James, one of the few gifts I had.
You and James Beard. I told James. I said,
think he was always jealous of my hair. To tell you the truth. Yeah, I think he was jealous of my hair, honestly. Yeah. Well, I had to carry James too. But, that's what it was.
Oh, the Hall of Fame is going to be a roast, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, good Lord. I'm going to have to show up sober just to be able to keep up with them. I know. Bart and James in the same room?
Goodness.
Oh, no.
It's going to be great. All right, well, today's topic is we're going to look back at Mid-South Pro Wrestling. Bill Watts, if anybody's a real fan, a student of the game of this business, you know the territories. Of course, in the 80s, Vince McMahon was taking the World Wrestling Federation National. Yep. Jim Crockett was running Jim Crockett Promotions in the NWA. Bill Watts had a successful promotion down in Louisiana, Oklahoma. He ran some Texas. Mid-South Pro Wrestling. And it had a real good run. For the people who don't know, I know WWE just put out a DVD about him. Jim Ross has got his start there. So many people did. But in the mid to 80s, Bill, along with several other promoters, were just, especially after WrestleMania, especially after WrestleMania 3, I think the fans' perception of wrestling changed, and they saw what Vince was doing. It's like, if this company can't match what Vince was doing as a presentation, then they must not be on the same caliber, which wasn't the case. A lot of the time,
perception is reality.
Right.
That's the key. That so many lose. When you talk about me being a booker, I can never claim to have been a booker of the nature of the Robleys and those kind of guys that actually book the big places. But those are the guys I learned from when I was booking the XCWs and the SCWs and the places like that. So you have to learn that even in the smoky beer halls, the municipal auditoriums, the armories and whatever, perception is reality. Vince knew that. Vince went out and, as you were just saying, made it appear that if you can't compete with this, you can't compete. It doesn't matter what product you put on in the ring. And this 87 is like a major jumping off point, but this had been going on for 2 or 3 years before that.
Right. Yeah, WrestleMania 3, Hogan and Andre set a huge attendance at the Pontiac Silverdome. You had Alice Cooper involved, and the whole world was kind of watching that date. So fast forward, and in that same year, Bill Watts sold the UWF, which was what Mid-South then became. Bill Watts, Mid-South, he wanted to, I think the UWF was more of Mid-South is more regional, we want to go national, so he turned it into the UWF. And I think they got television on PBS.
For a short time, and he had a syndicated deal.
Right.
And that was,
much like World 5.
Right. Well, see, today in 2014, everybody believes it's all about the cable. 1987, the cable wasn't as important as that syndicated deal. And Watts had one, but it was nothing compared to Vince's or Turner or Crockett, for that matter. Nothing at all. 50 stations is nothing to compare to 250.
Right. And and here's a little trivia. A lot of people don't know this. The man that Dusty broke in with, Joe Blanchard, he was on the USA Network before Vince was. Southwest Championship Wrestling.
A lot of people don't realize that USA kept Joe on for something like 6 or 7 months without him paying for that time slot because they were able to charge so much in advertising. USA Network in 1980, I want to say this is 1983, 82 at the earliest, 83, because by 84 it was Vince. So he was on for 6 or 7 months without paying a dime that he couldn't afford. It's like $6,000 a week at that time. But the ratings were so high on this network at the time, it had no ratings across the board. They could charge enough to make up for what Joe wasn't paying them. Vince had the foresight to see what was going on, went in and said, I'll pay Joe Blanchard's bill and I'll pay you a year in advance. And that's how that happened.
Right.
So that kind of feeds into the perception as reality. You know, this man can afford to pay us. I don't care what he can put on it. In fact, I can remember sitting in Joe Blanchard's office before he sold to Fred Barron, and they were trying to get on ESPN at the time, having just lost the USA deal. And ESPN told them straight up that the production qualities were not up to ESPN standards. Not one word about talent, not one word about excitement, not one word about wrestling, all about lighting and sound. So, again, it all comes down to you can't compete with the product, then you are second rate, even if what you put in the ring is tremendous.
Yeah, it's a visual presentation thing. I mean,
exactly.
The whole presentation as a consumer. And ESPN would later put on World Class, Global, and AWA on their station. So. Right. So, okay, so 1987, Bill Watts sells UWF to Jim Crockett Promotions. And during that time, from what I read, I was a kid at this time, so from what I read, you know, things were expected. It was expected that, you know, Dr. Death, who was a UWF champion, would make his way to work Ric Flair in some kind of unification match. That would be big business. Of course, some people this was a good thing. You know, the Stings, they got pushed. He worked Flair a year later, Classic champion, the rest is history. The Freebirds, I think the Freebirds had already made their mark here in Dallas-Fort Worth, I believe.
Yeah, in Georgia before that.
Yeah.
So they were already a commodity.
Terry was getting a run as a single star, but so very few people. I think Terry Taylor was the television champion at the time. So a few people they got more exposure and they got bigger opportunities. But a lot of people see this as a failed. You know, you could have done this, you could have done this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set the stage. It's 1987. It's April. Dusty Rhodes was the booker for Jim Crockett Promotions, so we're going to switch it over to Dusty Wolfe. So, okay, you are presented, Jim Crockett comes to you and says, okay, we're going to buy UWF from Bill Watts. What is your first thought? How do you put that, how do you bring that out?
I'm going to do exactly like Dusty Rhodes did. I'm going to do exactly like Dusty Rhodes did, to be honest with you.
Okay.
We can go into the book and what fun angles might be, et cetera, in a few minutes. But the reality is, this is one time that the village idiot Jim Crockett got it right. He knows he's the only competition possible to Vince McMahon anymore by this time in 1987. Now, you really don't have the breaking of kayfabe. We don't have the internet. You've got like Meltzer's scandal sheet, and that's about it. So you really didn't have a lot of people knowing what goes on in the wrestling business. And if I am the number 2 promotion, and in some cases in 1987, people don't realize this, Crockett was still the number 1 promotion in the old territory and some of the places out west or whatever. He was still outdrawing Vince, you know, up until into 87, 88. So I'm strictly business, strictly taking care of my bottom line. I'm going to get these TV deals that I need, which is what he got off of the deal. I'm going to get some of this talent that I'd like to have, which you just mentioned, Sting, Doc, a couple others, Terry Taylor. And then I'm going to do everything in the world to prove that I am number 2 at worst, number 1 at best. I can't have a company that the casual fan comes in and doesn't really know about, looking like they're a competition to me, especially if I'm fixing to fight the biggest dinosaur in the room. So I want to get that out of the way. That's one time Jim Crockett made a business decision that actually was the right one for his business. It wasn't really good for a lot of the fans, but how many? This is the question I have before we get into let's look who and so on. So, how many wrestling fans out there knew of Mid-South outside of the territory?
That's true.
You see where I'm coming from?
They didn't have national television.
Whereas Crockett had already been on TBS for a couple of years by now, or at least his talent had been. Right. You can't look like there's a threat to you from a third-rate group as far as the eyes of the casual fan goes. You can't do it.
Right.
I've heard that for years. And I'm like, I just shake my head. I'm like, guys, Crockett made enough bad business decisions. He was selling to Turner within months of all this, a year, something like that. So that this decision right here was part of it. Had he tried to draw this out with the invasion angle, there might not have been in there for Ted Turner to buy. In all honesty,
that's true. And I think not to step on your toes. I think at the time, I don't know if an invasion angle, and I've gone back and watched things. I was like I said at the time. I've tried to go back and educate myself. I don't know if 1987 was a year to invade. I mean, because you're right.
No.
There was no internet. There was very few.
No.
There was wrestling magazines. They kept kayfabe. So very few people. It's not like when Vince bought WCW years later. Vince could have capitalized maybe on at least a couple pay-per-views.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But he's in the position of where he's the undisputed one that you're trying to knock off the top of the mountain.
Right.
Now, you could get by that, but Crockett wasn't at that point yet. Right. Like I say, from a reality standpoint, I think they did exactly the right thing. From the fun point of what could we have booked, I don't know that the Birds would have helped you a lot. Doc was a commodity that they just completely underused. I will be the first one to agree with that.
So if you're the booker, if you're the booker, Dr. Death, he's a UWF champion. You're the booker for Crockett. How do you use Doc? How do you bring him in? How do you introduce him? Where does Doc go?
Doc is going to go straight to the top because Doc had that look. Doc had that intensity.
Right.
Doc, if you put him out there, even though he wasn't as charismatic, he couldn't talk the talk like the Hogans and a couple others, he was the guy that as long as you had the heels, which was the Flairs and the JJs that could do all the talking, he could have gone straight to the top real fast. I don't know that I would have done title versus title. Certainly wouldn't have dropped the belt to him just right off the bat.
Sure.
But all that stuff that they did with Garvin, slide Doc into it. If my timeline's right, I'm not completely positive my timeline's right, but something of that nature.
I think Garvin held it in 88. Yeah.
Okay, but something of that nature. He comes in, he brings in on that first TV. If he doesn't necessarily pin Flair, but you do the thing out of the blue, like where in the hell did this guy come from?
Right.
Flair takes his belt, takes his robe, and goes home. Now, if you spend the next 6 months, 8 months, which is something that was still done in those days, it's not as frequently, but it was still done. You spend the next 6, 8 months showing that this was ex-college All-American. He did play in the USFL. He was an All-American amateur. And you just keep getting him over. You keep getting him over. And you keep sending the Horseman in. And he keeps beating the Horseman in. He gets his hands off. And you continue doing this. And you show Doc working out. And he was an animal, so you just let him do his animal workouts. Then you can have him beat Flair. Reason I say you can do that is by then the people have forgotten that he was the UWF champion. Now he's just Dr. Death Steve Williams, who's just one tough SOB.
Correct.
And I honestly think that Doc was a missed opportunity, but I know exactly what goes back to what I said earlier. I can't have the top guy come in and just mow over everybody. They couldn't do that money-wise.
Flair.
Now, especially Flair. But if you had taken, like you say, cherry-picked, like they did cherry-pick Sting, but then let's teach Sting how to work.
Right.
They did just have him come in and mow everybody over, which is not the same exact situation, but it's the same general idea as what I'm giving you with Doc. Yes, right off the bat, Flair's like, what in the hell hit me? But he doesn't beat Flair.
Right.
It's just Flair just rolls out, grabs that belt, grabs that robe, and where'd this guy come from? And leaves. And then you spend the next, I don't care how long it takes. You know, we got all the time we want to play with because we're 25 years later, 20 years later, whatever, 30 years later, whatever it is. So we can make it all the time we want. But you definitely just keep them apart. Right. You know, poor Arn, poor Tully, Ole, Lex, whoever's in the group at the time, poor them. You know, it's just that simple. And just about every time it looks like he's got his hands on Flair, something happens. And you've got the Japan out to help you with that, which Crockett would have never cooperated with Japan like that, but you have the Japan tours to give you that out, to give you so many different directions you can go with this. Not just the injury, but the suspension, we fired him. You've got so many ways that you can go around this. To where, like I say, 6-8 months, maybe, well, a year's probably going to be too much for the Wrestling Fan 87, but 6-8 months later, 1, 2, 3, right in the middle of the ring at Starrcade or one of those other big shows, you got a new champ. Even if you don't keep it on him for 3-4 months. I think that would have been a waste to keep it on him only a little bit of time because of the Japan deal. But Crockett was so into being a corporate entity, I don't know that he would have cooperated with Japan enough to make it worthwhile.
But he still was Ryan Garvin. He's always been a head scratcher.
Yeah.
And that's nothing against Ryan Garvin.
Definitely was
a head scratcher.
Yeah, well, Garvin, by the time, had you tried to put the belt on Garvin 10 years earlier, it would have meant more. Right. Garvin was a completely different worker at that point in time than he was by the time they did it with him. And that was the old Lou Thez theory. Let's put the belt on somebody that I know is not going to draw. Let's put the belt on somebody I know is not going to get over, so when I come back, I mean more. You know, that
I think Hogan had that theory, too, at times.
Well, you can't blame him. In one way, you can't blame him. Really, you can't. There's only that one spot, and if you're penciled in, you want to stay there as long as you can. But yeah, when you're talking about the rebooking this thing, Doc was the one, and he's the one that you could do it today. Sting, I mean, what
about Eddie? What about Eddie Gilbert? What do you do with Eddie Gilbert?
Eddie was perfect for Memphis, where he wanted to be the king. Eddie on the national stage, I think there at the end where he was doing more of the hot stuff incorporated, where he wasn't in the ring all the time, but he would get in the ring because he could take the bumps and work the magic. I think that's where you put Eddie. Eddie's the new breed of the manager.
So more of a talker, antagonist, right?
Exactly, because you're especially coming out of the Hulk Hogan era, where I'm not a small man, but I was a small man in a giant man's world. Eddie was even smaller than I am. Right. Now, I'm not going to claim I had Eddie's talent, but it's still visual.
Oh, of course.
And when you take a guy like Eddie, of course, you're not going to move a guy like Akbar out because, you know, Akbar's loyal. But there's always a spot you want. Eddie, I think, would have told you he was his own worst enemy in his day. But less in-ring talent, more... he wasn't as hype as Cornette, but plug him in like a Cornette spot. I think you've got some money with Eddie on the national level.
Right, because, I mean, on Vince's television, you had Hogan and Andre.
Right.
You know, working at the top of the program.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think you're right. I mean, I've watched a lot of Eddie Gilbert, and I think he was ahead of his time as far as...
He had two problems. One, he was ahead of his time.
Talk.
He was ahead of his time. Well, that part you're right. And two, he had that ego that he was the next Jerry the King Lawler.
Right.
Well, somebody forgot to tell Lawler.
Which
means that Eddie never really had a place. Because no matter where Eddie went, he was always going to go back to Memphis and be the king.
Right.
That's why he didn't care who he made mad. That's why he didn't care who he made mad. That's why he didn't care if he walked out. That's why he didn't care what he did, which was his own worst enemy. Because in the long run, he was going to go back and he was going to, you know, you had Sputnik and Billy Wicks, then you had Jackie Fargo, then you had Lawler, and Eddie had in his head it was going to be hot stuff. It never dawned on him that Lawler was going to be around 40 years later.
Right.
Still not given the spot.
Oh, that makes sense. Right, that makes sense. Okay, so was there anybody else at the time that was working for Watts that you would have maybe done something different with? Or I think Hellwig had come to Texas.
Yeah, he came down here, and you know, he did the smartest thing he could do, even though he didn't know it at the time. He would have got buried out there with Crockett. There's no two ways about it.
Right.
He was just that bad, and then I never had a crossword with the man, but he did have that I'm take care of me first attitude, and that would have never fit out there.
Right.
I'm thinking of that, you know, they kept Steiner, which I think was a great move. And that's another one that they built over time. Really, you've got to realize that the roster wasn't as strong as it had been just, say, 2 years before. I think that's where some of the people
Right.
get lost in their fantasy. We want to do this, we want to do that. Yeah, 84, 85, you still had Jake and DiBiase and Gang and Duggan and
JYD.
Bourne and JYD, and the list goes on, Butch Reed, and the list goes on who went through there. Is that
Right.
by now Vince had them, and some of them Vince had already used them and thrown them to the side.
Right.
Two different territories, two different offices. That talent was so deep. Just 2 years prior, it was scary. But by '87, you had Doc, you had the Birds, who Michael was not going to make you a lot of money. Gordy could.
Right.
And I'm thinking of the talent. They'd like to say Sting and Steiner. They'd bring them in and make them ours. That was pure genius, because both of them are just young and they've got the potential.
And then they took Ray Traylor and brought him over and made him a bodyguard. He later went on the bench and made a little bit of money there.
Same thing. We taught him how. As a big man, we're gonna make something with him, and exactly what they did.
Right.
Yeah, Eddie's the only other one that we've talked about that I can think of off the top of my head. You could have right off the bat done something with. And that's something
with Terry Taylor.
Terry, I love Terry to death. Hindsight's what it is. Terry was about where he was going to be at any time, at any place. There were a couple of times where he missed the boat, just like the rest of us probably, but you're going to bring in the guy who's technically one of the finest wrestling hands in the business, but lacking in the color, and you're going to throw him in there with Flair, Steamboat, Dusty. I mean, we can go on the Road Warriors with you got so many of the guys. He just would have got lost in that big shuffle, I think. Honestly, do. Yeah. If you could have found him a good tag team partner, a Bobby Eaton, somebody like that, you could have kept Terry Taylor for another 10 years and get Crockett's territory.
And he was more known, I think, as an office guy anyway.
Yeah, and deservedly so. Terry understood. Terry's not afraid to tell people what he thinks. He doesn't have too many filters when it comes to that kind of stuff. I respect it.
Right.
I know some people think he's a stooge. Well, when you get into the office, that's just part of the job. I can cover for the talent if the talent deserves to be covered for, but if they're screwing up too bad, I can't cover for you. Well, if I don't cover for you, all of a sudden I'm a stooge. It's different than being one of the guys on the road. Well,
right.
Terry, behind the scenes, has done some really good stuff. Really has. And it's good when you don't always realize it was Terry that did it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've always heard real good things about Terry Taylor.
I know people say that that's not necessarily the way to go. Yeah, the best people at their jobs are the ones that you very seldom notice. Because a lot of jobs, that's the whole purpose of the job, is to do the job, not be the job. And so you realize that when he was sitting right there, that's one of the creative spots. He was a part of the creative team. He was training. He was doing whatever it was behind the scenes. And nobody really knows it. He did his job because he got the people over. He got the people trained, the person, the team, whatever, got them trained. He got them over. He had them where they needed to be.
Right. So basically what you're saying is if you have a pick, if you're Jim Crockett and you're just going to go to Universal and you're just going to pick who you want. So you pick Sting, you pick Eddie, an antagonist, you pick Terry because you're going to find him a good tag team.
I'm going to put him in the office eventually. Yeah, I'm going to put him in a tag team, or I'm going to put him in the office. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Obviously, Doc.
I'm keeping Steiner.
Rick Steiner, right.
I'm keeping Steiner. Doc's coming in and making the impact. Doc's my impact guy. No two ways about that.
Right. Now, Freebirds. You bringing them, or are you going to bring Gordy and have Michaels as antagonist, or his
I have to sit down with them, honestly. I have to sit down with them, because if I'm not going to be able to count on trying to recapture that lightning in the bottle with the Birds constantly, will I bring them? Yes. Are they going to have to understand that they're not my top tag team? Yes. because for obvious reasons, Gordy's got his good deal in Japan. He's staying in Japan. He's not going to trust the corporate deal on this end, whatever. Maybe that's what it looks like. And I'm going to assume that that's the way he's going to stay. So now, what do I do?
Right.
Do I keep Michael? Yeah, he's another one. He's a proven commodity. I think by 87, the birds were burned out as the birds, all honesty.
Sure.
As bad as that sounds, they started 10 years earlier out there for Gulas and then into Georgia and then Georgia to Dallas. There just wasn't as much left with the birds after.
Well, I think later Michael got moved to a color commentator anyway. I think Michael saw.
Yeah, they made work for him. Well, Michael was never the outlaw that he always portrayed himself to be. Michael was always going off. Always. It just somehow Michael's that rare human that could be the outlaw that pissed on the owner's shoes and not get fired.
Right.
Don't ask me how, because the same guy standing next to him pissing on the other promoter's shoe was fired, never heard from again. Michael just laughs and, once a free bird, always a free bird, and still has a job.
As
so he's unique in that one.
Yes,
he's unique in that. He always had a spot. People always wanted Michael around. Michael's had some good ideas. Of course, you don't know all that in 1987.
Right.
That's one of those things that time's proven. But, I would be stupid to not try to bring over the birds. As long as they understood the only way I'm making it my top team is if I know I got Bam Bam for 2 years.
Right, and later on, Bam Bam and Doc would get together in Japan, and they made a hell of a team that would stand.
Well, we're operating on hindsight, which means that you've got even a bigger angle later if you've kept Doc and made Doc a star.
Right.
Operating in hindsight, that's even another. Because now we can bring the Japan connection in, those two da-da-da. But I need Gordy if I'm going to do anything with the birds. I'd rather have Buddy Jack in there with them no matter what. But Buddy was always stirring the pot and making somebody mad. So it's understandable why corporate wouldn't take Buddy Jack. I love the man to death. This is a man that will challenge all the drunk to a fight in a public restroom. So I don't know that I need him in my company. Because who's he going to play? He's the same guy that tells Bill Watts. Bill Watts tells him something about don't lose the belts or don't tear up the belts, so I'll take it out of your check. And he's looking at his check and he says, "It looks like you already did, you cocksucker." So if he's willing to talk to Bill Watts like that, and the reputation Watts has as a bully, most companies don't want that. So it would have been a hard sell. But me personally, I want all three of them. I don't want them. I don't want them. That's what the people remember as the birds, is those three.
Okay.
But I just don't see me telling Francis Crockett. I'm bringing in Buddy Roberts, who will create problems.
Right.
I just don't see me telling Mom Francis that that's happening.
Okay, folks. Well, we've pretty much gone over what Dusty would have done. Dusty's made some good points. He's made some good points, and by the time that Crockett had got a hold of Mid-South, there wasn't much to salvage.
No, there wasn't a lot. That's where sometimes I shake my head at the fantasy booking, especially when we go back to what I was discussing about. I can't make myself look second rate by competing with what the fans consider third rate. And they did exactly like I was saying. I think they did right then. They cherry-picked the ones they need to keep.
Right. Well, folks, that has been that's our first installment of Guest Booker. Dusty's made some good points, and like he has stated, and you can go back and look at the history, you can study it. There was just a few guys that could have been, taken, necessarily either molded or just pushed based on the ability they already were given. And it looks like for the most part they did that. They did miss out on an opportunity with Doc, but Doc found later success in Japan, much like people like Gordy found great success in Japan along with Stan Hansen, and so many guys found their niche in Japan and didn't need the States by then.
And they didn't need the political game that was going on at the time with the territories. And if you're not in the clique, you're going to make this, or your contract's going to get cut or whatever, because they knew they had their deal over there. That it was 20 weeks a year, 30 weeks a year. This is your price, handshake, and you're not going to have to ever worry about your money. That's worth a lot.
Right. Okay.
So
well,
I can't blame a guy like Doc who just didn't take the deal, or took the deal, but he took it under his terms. Yeah, that's what I think. You can't blame him.
Right. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, Dusty has a book on Amazon. He wrote a book a few years ago. What's it called, Dusty?
No, Journal of a Journeyman.
Journeyman of a Journeyman.
Journal of a Journeyman.
Journal. Okay.
Yeah.
Journal of a Journeyman. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's still a few copies.
Yes, there is. I checked last night.
Yeah, I've had somebody want to money back or something, but yeah.
Get on there. I read the reviews. I haven't read the book yet. I need to. I'm going to get it from somebody. But there's some good reviews on there. I read them all last night. They're all positive. So I want to thank Dusty for joining us. Get on Amazon and type in Dusty Wolfe, and you'll get all the information on the book. Check it out. But I want to thank you for joining us, Dusty. We'll have you back on in the future, and I look forward to seeing you in March.
Yeah, if we don't talk between now and then, definitely I'll see you that weekend, because it's as I said earlier in the show, it's definitely an honor to be remembered like that.
Well, it's our honor to have you in, sir. I greatly appreciate it. Have yourself a good night, Dusty. Thank you.
All right, you too, David.
Thank you.
All right,
ladies and gentlemen, that was 2014 Texas Wrestling Hall of Famer Dusty Wolfe. He's made some good observations about the Mid-South Crockett merger. Dusty's got over 30 years experience in the business, and he was working during that time. He was working, we were having a conversation earlier. He was either working for the World Wrestling Federation or he was working in another part of the country at that time. Because it's Super Bowl Sunday, we're going to cut this show a little early. So I want to thank Dusty for coming on. If you want any information on our show, go to facebook.com/IHWE Pro Wrestling. You can find us through iTunes, through the Board Wrestling Fan Radio site. Just type in BWF Radio, and you'll go to the store, and you can find our shows through iTunes. We will be back this Wednesday. Michael McCurdy, our host, will be back in his spot. We're going to have Bruce Hart from the legendary Hart family, and we're going to have Bill Anderson, who's a longtime wrestling trainer. And then the week after that, we got Rob Schamberger, critically acclaimed wrestling artist. February 19th, we got Kevin Von Erich. On February 26th, we're going to re-air an interview I did with Hall of Famers General Skandar Akbar, the late General Skandar Akbar from 2008, an interview I did on my other show called Scars Radio back in the day. So I'm on Twitter at HXC Fuller. Have a safe and happy Super Bowl day, and we will see you, or hopefully hear from you, or you'll hear from us this Wednesday, 8 p.m., blogtalkradio.com/IHWE Radio. We welcome Bruce Hart of the legendary Hart family, and we welcome Bill Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are. We will be back this Wednesday at 8 p.m. Thank you to Dusty Wolfe for coming on, and have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.